Well, my name is Miles Davis. You can check me out at massiveburn.com is my fine arts website. I am a lifelong creative, been creating since I was about 5 years old. My parents were divorced, so creativity kept me company when I was traveling between households growing up. My dad was in the military, moved around a good bit. I've done cartoons, I've done logo designs, but primarily I am a fine artist. I went to fine art school at Auburn University. So I do a little bit of everything, but mostly fine arts painting for like museums and galleries and that kind of stuff. But I've done character design, I've done kids books. So I've done some murals. Murals are really nice. Kind of run the gamut. I'm just a creative person in general, and I like to get paid for it. I'm definitely not an abstract artist. I'm actually been going through a phase now where I'm trying to do more abstraction. Here's one behind me, actually, right here. I'm trying to do more abstraction kind of in the pieces, if that makes sense. But I'm definitely a figurative artist, but I was raised on comic books and video games. I was an 80s kid, so I was like a goonie, like riding around my little BMX bikes and my book bag and all that stuff, had fireworks in there and the whole nine. But so that's the environment I was raised in. So I was raised, and especially a divorced family, traveling a lot. I was always reading comic books, graphic novels, a little original Game Boy. So all of that kind of influenced my work. When it comes to art philosophy, I'm a big fan of surrealism just because of the dream qualities and stuff like that. But my surrealistic work tends to be a little bit more graphic than, say, the traditional surrealist work, at least artistically speaking, from like, Marguerite and Dali, of course, are the two most famous I can think of. I don't tend to make a series all at one time, if that makes sense. Like, what I tend to do is I tend to paint on anywhere from 5 to like 10 paintings at once. But what I'll do is I just go through my sketchbook. When I buy my canvases in bulk, I'll buy like probably 10 canvases at once. And then when I get my canvases in, I unwrap them all, and then I go through my sketchbooks, honestly. Or if I have an idea that's already brewing in my head for one of the canvases, I will just go right to the canvas and usually start sketching with a pencil or charcoal or something like that. When I started painting, I have a general idea, very general usually. And then when I get to a certain point, the painting kind of starts telling me what it needs from a technical standpoint. The painting at that point starts to communicate with me in a weird way. And so we kind of grow together. During those different processes, I pick up different little tricks or little processes or ideas that I like that may not fit this particular painting I'm working on. So then I'll curve that into another canvas. Generally speaking, out of about 10 pieces, I'll get to one or two pieces, maybe more, that I call my wow pieces or my breakthrough pieces. Those breakthrough pieces typically do one of a few things. They either further a series I've already started, they push my work in a new direction, or they are allowing me to experiment, and it may not be something I turn into a series, but it's something I get to play with the process, like a technicality, how to do clouds or a certain kind of sunset or a certain kind of sunlight coming in and evening and morning are different. So I can play with things like that from a technical standpoint. But if one of the pieces really sticks out and I enjoy the process that entailed, I'll jump into a series. And most of my series are not more than about probably 3 to 5 pieces. But sometimes I'll go back to a series too. So like I'll work on a series for a little bit, do 4 or 5 canvases. I'll go a different direction for a while, pick up stuff I like, and then I'll jump back on the series. So some of the pieces might be a little bit different. They might be done like 2 years apart. But hopefully in the long run, I'll develop like 10 or 15 pieces that look similar, Sure. I go through phases, but right now, I would say probably my top 3 biggest artists would be, from history, would be Caravaggio and Gustav Klimt. I really like both of those guys a lot. I have books based on them. I also like Frank Frazetta. A lot of people that are into like comic books and video games, they really enjoy Frank Frazetta. I have a lot of his hardback books up here. I went to art school, so I studied a lot of artists, but the style of Gustav Klimt, Art Nouveau, Alphonse Mucha, if I'm saying that correctly. Those types of artists from history are the ones that really cater to me. I did study Picasso. I wasn't a big fan of Picasso, but I do understand kind of what he brought to the table. Yeah. But now a modern artist I really like a lot is Joe Soren. I love Joe Soren. It's Joe Sorren. He's more of a modern artist. He's probably about 10 years older than me. I really like his work as well. Last year I did a bunch of black paintings. You'll see those coming out in the next probably 6 months. I have a big collection of that stuff already done. And that was based on, Mannerism and Baroque after Renaissance artwork and studying Caravaggio. And I'll get some of his techniques and I was like, oh, this is really cool. So I'll incorporate some of that. But I try to push all of it back towards surrealism, if that makes sense. But I do try to make it modern. I don't just want to copy history. I want to add something new to it for my own personal influences, particularly stuff that they couldn't do, right? They didn't have metallic pens back then. They didn't have spray paint, they didn't have all the tools that we have today. So I do try to modernize some of those philosophies a little bit. That's a really cool question, man. I get a lot of questions about skulls, but they always just ask, why skulls? My concept of death, I was raised in a military family, bitterly divorced family, and I was raised in a Catholic and a Methodist household, so two divided households, all Western doctrine. I wouldn't necessarily call myself religious per se. I am spiritual, and what do they always say, death and taxes kind of deal. So I think as an artist, you need to be as a fine artist. Again, if you have a project, you're working towards a client. But if you're working for yourself and trying to express your own philosophies, you should be honest with yourself. I really feel like you should be able to cover the good, the bad, and the ugly of the human condition. That's what I feel like a fine artist should be about, is exploring that, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And the only way to do that, I think, is to be honest with yourself and your own fears and your own interests, and genuinely try to portray that as best you can with your skills for your fans and your audience. So when it comes to death, I think it's a certainty. We're all going to have to endure death at some point. I don't have any major philosophies about where we go after death. I have some ideas and hopes and dreams, and I'm into science. I'm on like string theory and all this kind of stuff and different vibrations. Maybe we come back in a different vibration and a different existence altogether. I don't know. But yeah, death is a very interesting topic, and I feel like it kind of jars a lot of people. And so I feel like death is a very interesting topic. In my work, I try to take a little bit of the sting out of death sometimes, but I use it more as a symbol, but I paint a lot of happy pieces too. I've done florals, I've done really bright colors. A lot of my skull pieces will have bright colors in them. So I try to take away some of that sting, I guess, or that darkness around it, and try to discuss it in a visual way, in a more, a neutral way. Not as dark. I'm not trying to celebrate death, if that makes sense. I'm not trying to celebrate, the darkness of death, but it is a topic that needs to be discussed. At first, I tend to be cynical when it comes to the art establishment. Particularly the big one, like the auction houses, things of that nature. I'm not against the auction houses or against modern art, so to speak. I do have some reservations about a lot of it. I think a lot of it is perpetrated by, for lack of a better word, con men. So they'll find a piece and they'll do stuff, and there's a big tax write-off if you can look this up, and they can appraise it themselves pretty much. No, I'm simplifying and I'm ad-libbing, but there's nuances in the art establishment that I'm not a fan of. And I think that a part of that is they've been able to perpetuate a lot of abstract work. From a business standpoint, abstract work is so vague in a lot of ways, purely abstract work, or conceptual work for that matter, which are different things. They can be spun in so many different directions, and you can come up with so many different stories about it that it, in my opinion, it almost becomes easier to sell. So say you had an abstract work and then a piece of my work with a big skull in it. Unless you find a client that likes skulls, chances are it's going to be a harder sell than saying a bunch of colorful shapes on a textured canvas. Does that make sense? So from their standpoint, I understand why they're doing that, but I also feel like art has a more noble purpose than just producing stuff for marketing. It has a larger purpose. I think human nature, their nature to create, I think, is larger than just trying to make money. And I think a lot of the modern art has really gone that direction, where it's about conceptualization, and the work doesn't have to be executed well. It's just the idea. The idea is what sells the artwork now, as opposed to the idea is good, but the execution of that idea and making it as accessible as possible is a business standpoint. I don't know. Typically speaking, there are very good abstract artists and a lot of conceptual art that I do like, but generally speaking, I don't like a lot of it. I think it's derivative. I don't think that there's a lot of thought given into it, and I think a lot of salesmanship wraps itself around a lot of that stuff. But there's always exceptions. So there are challenges as you grow as an artist. Pricing is another thing that's hard. You start off low and you work your way up. It's much easier to raise your prices than it is to bring them down. So any up-and-coming artist, I would definitely recommend starting low, working up slowly. If you do a series of work and you price it and you sell all of it, it's a pretty good chance your prices are too low. If you do a bunch of work and you don't sell any of it, chances are that the prices are too high for the style of work you have. So when I started out, I'm a very proactive artist, which I've been told is actually a rare thing for a lot of artists. I'm very business oriented. Like I read all my contracts, I get out a ruler and a glass of wine and highlight the stuff on a copy and ask questions. And it probably annoys a lot of people, but I tend to be very professionally oriented. And so being a proactive artist, even in college, I used to go um, to local coffee shops as a student. And I would ask the coffee shop owners and the managers if I could put up some artwork. And of course, you have to discuss the details. Like, can I hang it with nails? And gotta do it by a string? Or do I gotta hang it from the ceiling? Like, what do you want the stuff to hang? So you have all those nuances to think about and details. But I would go have my own coffee shop shows. From there, it was mostly paperwork. And then I moved to Atlanta. I was working on Archie's paper a lot so I could keep it in a small space. I didn't have a big studio space. And then from there, I jumped to canvas. I would say I have a lot of my friends that I got lucky that I worked with a bunch of rock bands to do a lot of album covers. A lot of it was like hard rock. I was raised in the 80s, big like, hard rock. I like hip hop and classical music and things like that too. But if I had to pick one, I'm more of like a hard rock metalhead. And a lot of my fans, when I was growing up, I got published nationally at 18. Just a little stupid cartoon in a motorcycle magazine. But at 18, that's pretty cool. But when I got my biggest album cover was a band called Seven Dust out of Atlanta. And their fan base really took to my style of work, I guess. And a lot of them like darker work, the skull, the darker colors. So a lot of my fan base initially were based on the skulls, going back to your skull question. But of course, I also feel like as an artist, you ever wonder how come like a lot of hard rock bands, they get older, they get softer kind of? It's kind of the same thing with artwork. If I produce a bunch of dark artwork, I don't mind doing dark artwork. I actually enjoy it. But when I do that, it also has it's almost like exercising the demons, but at the same time, it also has a weight on you if you're surrounded by dark work all the time. I was in Philadelphia when I was first starting out. I traveled to Philadelphia for an art show, went to a festival, went up to this hotel in Philly, and long story short, I won't give you all the details, but there was a guy there who I never met. But as I was there, I was by myself. My wife had stayed in Atlanta, and I had gone to myself. This was, 15 years ago, maybe. I went to get a Philly cheesesteak sandwich. I'm in Philly, right? I'm like, I gotta get a Philly cheesesteak sandwich, a genuine Philly cheesesteak sandwich, right? I'm gonna go try one out. So they had security and everything, which is crazy. So I went down out of the hotel, went out to the street corner, got me a sandwich, walked it back up to the hotel, got to my booth, sat down. Everything looked fine, but as I was packing up, I guess it was the next day, I realized that something seemed to miss. I didn't know what it was. When I got back to Atlanta, I was checking my inventory, and I realized, I was like, wait a second, I'm missing a paper piece. Fast forward 6 months, right? I just chalked it up to bad luck, whatever. Somebody took a piece when I wasn't looking. I didn't know when it happened. I get a phone call, this guy who stole my piece. He admitted he stole the piece. He's been following me. He contacted me, and then he wanted me to come move up to Philly and start an art commune with him. I never met this guy in my entire life. I still don't know what he looks like. Then he said, I want to pay you for this piece that I stole. You already have it. I don't know who you are. I don't know where you live. So yeah, okay. So he gave me half price for what I was charging for it. And then I never called him back because obviously if you steal a piece from me, I'm not going to go into business with you. Doesn't make sense. I got offered one time to leave my wife so that somebody could just take care of me. He was a composer, apparently a famous composer. I say famous, not like world famous, but made very good money apparently. Yeah. He offered, and I'm not going to drop names, but he offered to actually take care of me. He said you leave your wife, come live with me, and I'll take good care of you. You can work until you die. I was like, I'm going to do that anyway. And I'm not gay. I'm sorry. My artwork got stolen one time. Not stolen by the guy in Philly, but stolen for an art book for an art school for young kids. And I saw it. And because my name is Miles Davis, like the jazz guy, but a friend of mine saw it. He was teaching his kid and came across it, and he recognized my artwork. And it was in a book about Miles Davis, the jazz guy. And so I had to put forth a letter, cease and desist to this book to stop putting my work in that particular book, just because they were giving credit to Miles Davis, the jazz guy, and not me. So as far as the work is concerned, it's been getting larger in size. And I'm proud to say I have my first museum show coming up next year, April of 2022. I'm having a museum show here in Atlanta. It's at the Marietta Cobb Museum of Art, MCMA. And I'm sure we'll be marketing a lot of that on our social media channels as the time gets closer. But in prepping for a show, it's really about how big of a venue do you have? We put on a lot of our own shows. We produce a lot of our own shows. So we'll rent out a warehouse, things like that. So there's a much more heavy-handed business side to it if you're doing it yourself. You got to know when to market certain things, like 2 months out, market the show. But by then you got to have your logo and your work set, what's going to go in the show. Because once you build the flyers and in the marketing, you don't want those pieces to be there, right? You don't just want to sell those pieces off and that piece is not even there at the show. So there's lots of details to think about, but it's really about location, timing. And I'm a big fan of branding. Like, I like to come up with a really cool logo for all of my art shows. And my wife is a big help in that department when it comes to the digital side of stuff and digital marketing and things of that nature. But every show has its own needs, but I do try to stick to my brand, talking about science and spirituality and a little bit of politics here and there, and present that in an exciting way, because I'm a painter. I mean, painters are a dime a dozen. There's so many of us out there. It's really about trying to cultivate an experience. Now, that said, I will say there's art parties and there's art shows. Art parties tend to be where everybody comes and they look at the artwork, they have a great time, and they drink a lot, usually get drunk, whatever, mingle, and then they leave, and you sell very little artwork. An art show is not meant to be that. An art show is meant to be the focus of the artwork. You try to focus your marketing on collectors. Better to have 100 people show up and you got 10 that buy stuff, right? Than have 500 show up and don't have anybody buy hardly anything. So there is a difference between, I've gone into that. I've thrown art parties and I've thrown art shows, and there's a difference in how you market those. In every show I do, there's one of two goals. Well, it's always the same goals: to spread the word about my work and my brand, and our brand. My wife is 49% of Massiveburn Studios. And then on top of that is to, of course, make money, to make sales. But ultimately, I think that if you spread the word and you spread that out, you'll find your sales. So, but yeah, putting on a show is hard work. It's hard work and it takes time. But it's worth it, I think, if you do a good job. So who knows? I'm traveling to New York this September to go to a show in New York. Yeah. Only been to New York one time, and it wasn't for artwork. So this should be interesting. It's going to be my first show in New York. So in September, I'm excited about that. And then I have another show in Miami for Art Basel, actually, in early December. I'm excited about the museum show. I've been working hard on that. Yeah. I'm getting a lot of happier work recently because of the Caravaggio studies and the Baroque, using a lot of black and strong highlights. I've kind of shifted away from that more into brighter colors recently. I've been trying to mix a lot of like traditional realism in with the abstracted processes to kind of see how that stuff melds. Some work better than others, so we'll see where it takes me. So, so I'm really looking forward. If any of your listeners or viewers want to check out more of what I do, they can go to massiveburn.com. If they want to check out my kids' books, they can go to butterpupandfriends.com. And it's an and, A-N-D, friends.com.